This is Dee's Practice Pod. Today we're going to talk to an old friend. I met this fella. We used to teach for the same school, the Long Island Drum School. His name is Marko Djordjevic, and he's just an unbelievable drummer. It was always a treat to have a student not show up so I could listen to him practicing. Hard-working guy. And I guess this is the best time to introduce him now because I have a bajillion questions that I probably already know the answer to, but, you know, I'm leading just a little bit. Okay, so...
Here we go. Wow, that was a very good introduction. Coming from somebody who really knows what's happening with the drums and who's a great player in their own right.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So, Marko, when I first met you, I was listening. I was actually in my teaching room, and I'm hearing somebody play in the next room, or what I thought was actually two people playing in the next room. And it was not. It was you solo in there. And, well, you have a probably the... There, yeah, okay, but if you were actually able to get from, you know, there is a show on TV called The Flash now. He could probably play two sets at one time, but you were just playing the hell out of the one that you were behind. You have possibly the most unique approach to our instrument ever, and I can tell you, it really surprised me because, you know, when you've been playing for a very long time, you have some predisposed idea on how good you are, and you know how much of a grasp you have on your instrument, and to hear someone play it, well, not just play what I'm playing, but play something just completely different, it's very eye-opening, and I think that's one of the things I like about our instrument the most is just when you think you learned it all, you heard somebody that has such a completely different way of looking at things that you realize you still have a lot more to go.
I hear you. I mean, what I would add to that is that I think, you know, when we were kids and we were trying to get our instrument to sound good and, you know, trying to make music on it, I think we also have this idea that eventually, you know, if you practice hard enough and get into the right sorts of situations and be led by or guided by the right people, you may get to the point where you've conquered it all.
Yes. There's somewhere over the rainbow.
Exactly. Yeah, eventually, you know, you find out that that's not exactly how things work, but I think there are two aspects of, you know, along the same line of thought that I think play into this. One is you never lose that desire, no matter how impossible it is to actually reach that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And then once you actually can marry that desire to get to it all with the realization that you actually will not, because it's just not possible, you come to a point where everything, at least that's how it's been for me, where everything just becomes a serene road on which you keep making your attempt, but with, you know, much less frustration and much less angst and antsiness, and much more in a peaceful, productive manner, and also it bodes well for the creativity as well, because when you remove the shackles of an unreasonable desire, you end up with you know, with just you know, with what your heart really truly wants to do, which is just to sit there and play drums and make music, you know, and that's really works well for me.
Well, I could not possibly have put that better than that. And since we've gotten to whatever point we're at now, why don't we roll back the clock a little bit? How did you first get into drumming? I should tell everyone first that Marko has probably a better grasp of the English language than I do, but he's not from the United States. Why don't you tell everybody where you're from originally?
I'm from Serbia originally. I was born in Belgrade in 1972, and essentially as far as my musical development goes, I tried other instruments before drums, and but I always really wanted to play the drums. I played the guitar. That really didn't go well at all. I didn't have a knack for that. I played the trumpet for a year. That went really well, but I just, as much as I enjoyed it, it was really not what I wanted to do. I had fun doing it. It was a great teacher who taught it, and some friends of mine from elementary school who went, actually a fellow by the name of Marko Djordjevic, who is now actually a bona fide trumpet player, and playing all around Europe. I figured, I had the better grade than him at the end of the first year, so I think I just left him the trumpet and said I was going to be the Marko Djordjevic who plays the drums.
Yeah, that could be confusing. Was it spelled the same way?
What's that?
Was his name spelled the same way?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Oh.
And plus his sister's first name was Maya, just like my sister's name. So
wow,
really
that's
funny. Just coincidence. And we went to the same elementary school. We were classmates in the elementary school, and then we, the recruiting people from the music school came to our elementary school, and they said that the two of us would do well in trumpet, so we signed up and went, and I lasted a year, he lasted a lifetime.
Well, that's just where his passion lies then.
Yeah.
You always
not long thereafter, I found an ad about who was to become my first and to this day the best teacher, coming back from the Jazz Academy in Graz. He was the first graduate. That was basically a classical school, and they just had opened a jazz department, and he was the first drummer actually to graduate from the jazz department of that school, and he came back from Austria and was starting to get lessons. So I found that ad in the paper and told my mom that this is something that I wanted to do, and so my mom signed me up, and I went, and it was just great because I learned the right way from the start. I still go take lessons with him when I go back home.
What did you say his name was again?
Miroslav Karlovic.
Wow.
Miroslav Karlovic, like Carlo. That was actually his nickname. Everybody called him Carlo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
wow.
So yeah, that's that. And before that, even while I was trying the guitar or practicing the trumpet, I would, just bang around on my mom's detergent boxes. They were round, like big tubs.
Right.
They made pretty good drums, actually.
Wow.
So I would just rock out on those and just do whatever I could to try to figure it out and get as close to it without having a kit as possible.
Well, I think you did a bang-up job of it.
Oh, yeah.
Bang-up job. Hey, great.
Well intended,
Yeah. But
right.
your education didn't stop there. Firstly, did you have aspirations to come to the States first, or did college just call you there and it happened to be where it was?
That's basically what happened. I basically by Berkeley being such, even at that point, now obviously they're just a humongous machine, and that has done very successful marketing the world over. But at that point, it was a little more word of mouth, but still there were, their presence in Europe was very strong. There was even like a mystique about it and all this stuff. And so I ended up applying to Berkeley, and that was the advice that Carlo gave me too. And then that's really how it happened. I would have ended up anywhere where people who meant well, and
Well,
it's very beneficial and very productive.
Yeah, that was my question because I've talked to a lot of people who went to Berkeley, some of which had very good experiences, and some of which it was the bane of their existence.
Understood. Yeah.
So it must be a very challenging program.
That depends. I mean, I can, from having been there as a student, now being there as a teacher. I mean, I get how it could be the two extremes. But it really has to do with basically the ideas, designs, and goals that you set out, for yourself before ever getting there. I think, not to say that things can't change while you're there. In fact, they probably do for a lot of people. But I think people go in with expectations and ways that they think things would work. And I think, generally speaking, the ones who have a negative experience are the ones who set up either expectations that were not realistic or had some misapprehensions about how to move towards your goals in music. Also, I shouldn't neglect to point out that Berkeley is a huge school. So in a way, I view it as a really good. People always talk in college how eventually you'll get to the real life, and the college existence is slightly shielded and not grounded in reality. I feel like Berkeley actually really is. It's so huge, and you can see so much from the most talented people you can think of to people who really shouldn't be considering music at all. And as well with the teachers, like some of the greatest teachers that you could ever find, some of the greatest musicians, and then some people that are really, average or below average.
Right.
So you really, it runs the gamut. And for a person who kind of has a realistic idea about life, I suppose, I think Berkeley's a great place to be because that's exactly what you're going to find there is like real life.
Right. So you feel also that they're sort of in tune, pun again, with the music industry and that sort of thing.
I definitely. I mean, to be honest, that aspect of it is not my favorite. I believe that they're currently in tune to a fault. In other words, there are things that I really, I'm sure you can relate. There are things that I really dislike about the music industry that I think they are getting into because, for commercial reasons.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure some of it is pure survival.
Yeah.
But also probably situations that they brought on themselves to begin with.
Well, I mean, the thing about pure survival, yeah, in a way, I think, but past that, I think this is a way to way more than purely survive. I mean, this is a way to make the serious money, and so, you can't really fault them for wanting to do that. On the other hand, somehow, the vibe, although it would be, I mean, it's hard to say this without talking from both sides of my mouth because, I mean, I've been meeting and playing with some incredibly talented students, so there's no question that there's still that aspect of Berkeley as being like a real playing school, and that's what I loved about it when I was there. But there's also some aspects of it that really go into literally the music industry vibe, and
right.
Creating, songs to be hits and, having a major that's, that when I was there was film scoring. Now there is a separate major dealing with video game music.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It really does reflect the way things are. I mean, there's a lot of music being written for video games, but
Well, sure. Video games are proving to be more profitable than movies.
I mean, that's kind of what's wrong with the world.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's hard to, it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
But definitely, like I said, having been
You know,
ability on that level.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, I mean, so definitely, there's definitely more than just a speck of light. There's considerable light still at Berkeley.
Yeah, I mean, there are those who will argue that this coming generation is one of the most softest, most what's the word I'm looking for?
I think that's really a good word. That's really, and I know exactly.
Entitled is another good one. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily wrong, but I would say that maybe it's you shouldn't view them there as a clear sweep. The kids that do have their nose to the grindstone have it deeper into the grindstone than anybody I've ever seen. You know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, in some ways, it may also be working in contrast too.
Well, so there might be a little bit of guilt for the rest of their generation.
Softness, then you get surprised when somebody even comes near the grind.
Yeah. Speaking as a fellow educator, I'm in the private sector, but when also we spoke of the movies. Did you see the movie Whiplash?
Yes, indeed, I have, and actually on the urging of a student who's a very good friend. I mean, he's a bit older than both of us, and he's a great guy, kind of an interesting person because he does a lot of different stuff. I mean, he's an architect, so that's his, that's what he does, but he also has like a shop in which he does like artisan woodwork.
Right.
And he also has a great love for music, so he's been, at the drums for a very long time, and has developed, a very, very commendable ability on our instrument. And anyways, he saw it, and I, like I said, through the lessons, we actually have we've become really good friends.
Right.
And, so he asked me to watch it because he'd just seen it, and I did watch it after that. And was there a specific question about that, or would you want me to?
Well, yeah, that was just to open up the door to it. But did much like most movies that are based on music, there's usually not a whole lot of playing being done by the actors themselves. That being said, though, what did you feel? Let's just I'll play devil's advocate and say this kid played everything. What did you feel about the? Did you find it realistic, particularly the approach and expectations of the main professor?
No, I mean I didn't, but I honestly didn't begrudge the creators of the movie that aspect too much. I mean, in some ways, I felt like it was something that they had to do because it's a
to drive the story.
Movie, it's a typical hero story.
Right.
You get the calling, then there are obstacles, then you overcome them, and there's the dark, kind of like the light, dark light figure, the Darth Vader kind of
yes.
character in the
right.
in the teacher, blah blah. But the thing that really took, if the movie had any wind in its sails up until that point, all of the wind went out when the kid goes back to the rental car place to retrieve his sticks. You remember that? Because
yes.
He had to, the bus, so there were so many unrealistic things about him getting on the bus by himself to go to this band competition. I would imagine that 99 times out of 100, the band would go there together in a chartered bus.
I would think so, yeah.
Especially if the people was all about, you're a band, you're a group, blah, blah, whatever. But then, the fact that he wasn't allowed to play because he forgot his sticks, and then going back, and then after retrieving the sticks and getting back into the car, the 18-wheeler comes along
Right.
That's when I started laughing. And
Yeah.
that's where the movie, if there was any shred of credibility that the movie had with me, it lost it right there when the 18-wheeler was the metaphor for another hard knock.
Right. Well, that's where it went from being basically a hero picture to a superhero picture.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I mean, I had a big issue with that, and from then on, like I said, if I even watched the movie even remotely seriously up until that point, from that point on, it just became just a laughing stock. But I will say the one thing that my friend told me about and that we discussed at some length was there's a quote from the movie coming from the teacher that the most damaging words in the English language were "good job." I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that we discussed. My student and I, or I should really say my friend and I, because at that point, I mean, obviously, like I said, I've known him for a while. We've been doing
Right.
We've developed a friendship beyond student-teacher, and we discussed that in some ways that that sentence does resonate, and I think it goes along with what you've said as the assessment of the generation as being softer, and then I think good job is a way of appeasing the softie.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a problem with it if a good job is actually warranted. I feel it's pretty overused.
Absolutely, and I think that in the way it was put in teachers' dialogue, it was definitely meant to
Right. Yeah.
to denote the times when it's used without merit.
Right. Right. Well, just to put this particular thing to bed, my biggest contention that I had was actually more of a technical issue. When he has.
I skipped that altogether. Maybe that was the wrong.
Oh, okay. Well, they were. I think they were practicing Caravan, and they had all of the drummers going back and forth, seeing who could do it at the proper speed, and how meticulous the conductor was being about what the exact speed was. And that being said, I'm sure that there are guys that are that much of a hard ass, but to have these guys trying harder and harder and harder and harder to play this thing at that speed, trying harder and harder and harder makes it impossible to play it at that speed. I mean, it's just the basic physics of what it is that we do. As soon as you tighten up, you're going to slow down.
Most definitely.
So that I think, but obviously to push the story along, that's the reason why they had to do it. But all drummers who have tried to do it that way have failed 100%. But
also that part of the movie really goes along very well with the part of the movie where he's practicing and then he's bleeding and he's
yes,
putting his hands into ice.
yeah.
I mean, for crying out loud, that. But I feel like, when I honestly reassessed my view of the drum set when I was a child,
Right.
and of what it took, I also thought that it took that kind of brute physical force and strength and endurance to play that instrument. I didn't know any better.
Right.
So I think this is, and now I can kind of tie it in to an infantile, or at least to an audience that you consider to be infantile, because you're playing to the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
You present an infantile view of something like drumming, or it could be anything else.
Well,
Just
yeah.
imagine, for us who know a little bit about this topic, seeing it portrayed in a way that's quite at odds with what the reality is. Just imagine, there was a great really long. So what am I to think about all this other stuff that, because no human can know everything. What am I to think of all this other shit that is being sold to us that we have no idea about?
Well, sure, right.
And that's kind of how I view the movie itself. So they just kind of, threw it in, tried, and I guess, they made a movie.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty entertaining, but it was in fact fiction, and I guess we'll just leave that there. Yeah.
On many levels.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we've gotten from the past. What's going on in the present?
Well, lots. Really, there's so much playing. I've been traveling a lot in the last, in the last many years. I've been doing quite a bit of playing and traveling, being on the road. This year in particular, going back to November, I was in Spain doing this drum festival and some gigs around that. Then I was in Mexico not too long ago with Ole Matheson. I was in Peru playing down there for a week, and I'm about to leave town in about 3 days actually, and be on the road that'll take me to my home country, Serbia, Slovenia, Germany, China, the west coast of the United States. It'll be like a veritable trip around the globe between the 20th of June and the end of July.
Wow.
So, just a lot of playing.
Well, you've always been busy.
Yeah, it's been, playing-wise, it has been very good. And, right along with that goes the fact that I'm practicing as much as I can. I also have my own group, which some of the stuff that's going to be happening on the road is going to be with 4 or 5 different projects, but among them also parts of this will be with my own group, which is a group that I write all the music for. And
Sveti.
Currently in the lineup, it's the great bass player Evan Marion, and no less great Julian Pollack on piano and keys. And so it's a really rewarding experience playing with the two of them. We're getting ready to do a new album in the fall. I have 4 albums so far.
You are referring to Sveti, right?
Exactly. And on the teaching front, I've been at the collective, the Drummers Collective, for about a decade now, and for about 3 years I've been teaching at Berkeley. So it's a pretty full plate, I have to say.
I'd say so.
So yeah, that would be, and I guess looking into the very close future after the road this summer, some drummy things. I've been invited to play at both PASIC and the London Drum Show, which will happen literally, they'll be 3 days apart. So because they schedule them in the same week, which is slightly surprising. You would think that major events like that would be a little bit more coordinated in that sense.
Right, so that they wouldn't be competing directly against each other for the same audience. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, lucky for me, it'll work out, and I'll be playing at both, which is it's really nice.
Oh, so they didn't have a Letterman Leno thing where you play at one and don't play at the other.
Yeah, no. I think it's cool. I think all these drum festivals are usually pretty cool, unless they're put on by a particular brand, in which case, obviously, you can only participate if you play that particular brand.
Well, of course, yeah, they have to have their agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, that's what's been going on recently. And one other project that I haven't mentioned, and it's not going to be happening in this whole road swing, but apart from my band, there's a trio called the Takeoff Collective, comprised of Matt Garrison on bass and Ole Matheson on tenor saxophone, and it's a great band. First of all, because the musicians are amazing, and second of all, because what we do actually is we play completely open and free, and we do it in one. More than 90 times out of 100, or I should say 9 times occasion we stopped in the middle when it just really felt like something came to a close very strongly. But generally speaking, it's just an extended improvisation format. We come to, with nothing preordained. We come to the table with just who we are at that moment, and then we go from there. I guess hence the name Takeoff Collective.
Right. So essentially a big jam session with guys who are super accomplished.
I would say that's probably a good assessment. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I'm starting to notice that now we've really played probably 20 shows in about a year and a half. So it's not that much, but it's roughly a show a month.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes and obviously some months it's a little bit busier. Some months when I'm away, they also tour a great deal, so we're not always in town at the same time. But the point is, I've also noticed that there are certain things that after playing for that long, and plus, I've been playing with Matt for a really long time, ever since Berkeley, and we all went to Berkeley at the same time. I didn't really meet Ole until a little bit later, in terms of, I met him over there, but we didn't play and musically meet him until sometime later in New York. But we know each other pretty well, and now that we've played in this format, I feel like there are certain places that we gravitate towards or that we tend to go to. So I think now that the challenge is to not do that to a point where it becomes obvious. You know what I mean?
Right.
It has to. I think the magic of it is when some magic happens, and that's usually something unexpected.
Right.
The intention is to try to keep that up open aspect and reach for spots that are beyond the comfort zone, at least for not necessarily like in every second of every performance, but
right.
to have that not ever become lost on us.
But that's how we advance performance.
Definitely.
So.
Most definitely. So yeah, that's the current state of affairs.
Okay. And actually a little bit into the future as well. What I have a question from a former student. By the way, you did mention a student of mine, Sean Butani, who I did mix up two names and faces. He wasn't a little boy. I saw him probably only a few months ago, and no, he's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Good player.
And talented.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But I kind of hipped him to you.
That's what I heard. He told me that but then when you said that it was so long ago, then I was like,
Yeah, it's a different. Yeah, I was thinking of another gentleman. Yeah. Yeah. But one thing that I do use YouTube a bit in my studio, because I do believe that I don't know everything. So sometimes someone says something or demonstrates something that is so perfect that if I already know that someone else has done it in a way that will get so much clarity, then I'm just going to use their version of it. And there's a few videos of yours that I do use, and one of them is your development of the single stroke. And that's the first time he saw you. And then I did play some of the Sveti stuff that I have of yours, and and there's a number of students, my more accomplished guys, that I do like to show them music other than what they hear on the radio, because that's usually the most watered down version of what it is that we do.
Understood.
So.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's totally cool, because like I said, he did mention it, and it's just the only reason why I didn't mention it is because when we talked about it, like you said, now you actually
I can't believe I did that.
You misfiled for a second.
Yeah, well, the reason why is because I'm doing my summer push to try to get, so I'm going through Rolodex of old guys who've been to college and such, to try to reinvigorate the relationship. And, sometimes you just mix those names and faces up, but what are you going to do? But I don't know how I did it either. I mean, I've had him on and off for a very long time, and, I have seen him go from a high school kid into, beyond being in college and being a man, so it's been a while.
He wasn't as young as you.
No, I was thinking of another fella, and now I can't bring his name to the front of my brain. So I guess there's a finite amount of space up there.
How many students do you have? Like when it's really busy, how many students is that for you?
I've topped off at about 33 right now. I have about 18.
Got it.
I did kind of let things lapse a little bit because it is very cyclical. I teach a lot of kids, so you lose them to college, and then you have to replenish. But I had to build my own studio, and it is such a Herculean endeavor to do. I just needed all that time to build, so I did let it shrink out of necessity, but now it's not always the easiest thing to bolster it back up again. But well, I'm doing okay. What about you? Well, do you teach privately?
Obviously a whole lot. 18 is still pretty.
It's significant,
number.
That's not enough to keep me out of a day job, though.
Understood.
And I'd really rather be doing music exclusively.
Yeah.
But it's tall order. It's a real trek to try to do that. Speaking of which, you have managers, or how do you get gigs?
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't have anybody that's a manager. For the last album, I hired a publicist and a radio promo person. I am talking currently to this agent in Europe that I'm hoping we come to a place where we're actually working together. He's pretty well connected, and that's really, more than anything else, that's what I need. Because my most definitely my primary goal, musically speaking, these days, even though I love playing with different people, there's no question about that, but I mean, and I obviously take gigs that I think are worth my time musically and all that, but my band is my band, and
Right.
what I really need is to step up the booking game with that, and we've had some pretty good success, like booking gigs around town or being able to go on short road trips. Like we did a 10-day tour on the West Coast last year, a year and a half ago now. And stuff around New York's been good. Every so often we get some travel stuff, like we're gonna get this summer. But it would be really nice. What I'm aiming for is like around. What would be great is like between 20 and 30 really meaningful international gigs a year. So not like a crazy, 100, 200, whatever. I'm not really even interested in that. What would be great is to have a few really nice tours and then play, in town a couple of times a month. And that would be good. That would be around, all told, like 25 to 30 gigs touring, and then another, realistically, about 20 gigs in town a year, 20, 25. It's usually a couple of times a month play in town. That would be 50 gigs with my band, and I would be very, very happy if that materialized, But for that I can't do alone. Or if I did alone, it would literally be all I could do. You know what I mean? Like it would mean a Herculean effort, like you said, but on the booking front.
Right.
Nearly impossible.
Well, in order to continue to advance as a player, it's kind of hard to take that time away from that to. I'm speaking from personal experience.
Most definitely.
Yeah, it just there's only so many hours in a day, and I think your time is much more well spent practicing and hoping that the people that are around you are going to treat you properly, and
Yeah, but I mean, the other side of it, I remember talking when I just moved to New York. When I met Wayne Krantz, and we started talking, and I remember, I think things are. So this is 20 years ago, basically 97, so just short of 20 years.
right.
And he was doing all the playing in the 55 and stuff like that, doing some touring, but it was literally, when he booked a tour and he was really saying how that's all he was able to do for 2 months, just getting the contacts and, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
doing all this stuff that literally put him off music, essentially, in order to be able to play
Right.
the music, so it's
The catch-22.
in today's world, I mean, it's hard, even at the high, maybe not at the very highest level, obviously, with people who are names for a long time, but certainly in terms of musicianship, at the highest level, you have people who are having to do their own legwork, or at least a good portion of it, which it's just an unfortunate reality of
Yeah.
the world we live in. I don't think it was like that before. Not to mention that, before, even when you don't talk about booking and touring, but just being in a club in New York, I mean, the club was the venue, the club, they did a lot of the promo. They were the ones responsible.
Exactly, as opposed to now.
Or even more for
Right.
bringing the people in,
Right. Well, years ago, I mean, at 1:00 in the morning, there would be people coming into a club, not even knowing who was going to be playing. They went there because it was the club, and you must know your onions if you got a gig there. Now it's the opposite. The clubs are really just real estate ventures that are open, and they want us to do all of the footwork and all of the promotion and spend all the money, and I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'm not glad to hear that you're experiencing the same kind of thing, but
I feel the same way.
I empathize. Let's put it that way.
I know I am not. I mean, it's been going on for quite a while now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is maybe a quarter of a century of that, maybe even more.
Yeah. Well, it's picked up speed with places like, let's say, Loaded. Or ones like that, which claim to be promotional concerns, but really they're really printing companies.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there's not much that can be done except continuously seek out places to play and hope for. I mean, there are definitely folks who do get into it for the right reasons and try to do it almost old school like, but in a way that's more equitable and
Right.
virtual and blah blah and sharing the burden of getting the people in and all that. So yeah, it's probably a bit of a tougher world.
Yeah.
In that sense than it used to be, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do our best.
Well, I wouldn't. This is sort of also how the world sort of breeds mediocrity. A guy at your playing level should be a household name, but well, that's the world we live in.
But man, I mean, generally speaking, the interest in the kind of music that we're talking about is also decreased.
Oh, it's a boutique thing. It pretty much always has been. It always goes back to pop, whatever pop is at the moment.
Understood, but I think either pop used to because if you consider that pop used to be, well, I mean, in some ways, jazz even at the point of like going between 50s and the 60s when things started getting pretty open and bebop was already a thing, jazz was still fairly popular. And then, moving into the late 60s and early 70s, I mean, if you think about Jimi Hendrix was popular, bands like Mahavishnu and Weather Report were pretty popular.
Well, you can make the argument that Beethoven was pop music at one point.
Well, yeah.
Right?
There's that as well, right?
Right,
So,
right.
So I guess it's a strange thing where, it's hard to understand how things go from, pop music being something that also carries some weight and meaning to a song like Lady Gaga's Alejandro. I was in Barcelona after a gig and in a cab, and that was the first time I ever heard that song, and I just thought, like, man, we've stooped to new lows.
Well, she's a smart girl. She went to NYU, but it was not for music. It was for marketing. You think she did her job?
Oh, well, there you go.
So.
I'm sure there's a machine.
Sure.
Sure. I mean, at this point, I guess maybe she really initially used her marketing savvy to get herself into a position that she got herself into. But I mean, regardless, however,
the thing is too that she's very talented. Also, I mean, if you've heard some of the other things that she's done that aren't pop, she's got some, she's got some chops. It's just,
I didn't even know, because I think I probably heard that song, and if I heard anything else.
Right.
Poker Face is her song too, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's cut. That's the same basic. Yeah, but she did some stuff with Tony Bennett, and she can sing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. It's just that when you do a song like Alejandra, that to me kind of ends you.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot for us to chew on with that either, and that always will.
It's the vacuity of it.
Yeah.
That upsets me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chew on or to.
Well, I think it's because I don't know whether I guess it's from whatever perspective you take, but it could either be an evolution or a devolution. But if you think about it, we went from just music to then the music business to now the music industry. Mm-hmm. So you got to churn this stuff out, and now at a way lower profit margin than you were making before, because now the minute that you put it out there, somebody puts it online and it just gets stolen anyway. So how much effort should you put into this to just to throw it out there to not make any money? And if that was your original intention, is to make money, then you're going to do as little as possible to make that money. If you're really an artist like yourself, you're going to be a little bit more content with less money, but you can sleep at night because you know that you did something that actually is worth it.
Yeah, so, and I like that evolution-devolution thing, because as much as it applies to what you said about, it being music business, music industry, how did we get to a state of affairs where, something that used to be the music of the day also used to be fairly good music or great music or really interesting music or whatever it happens to be. I mean, I'm sure there was crap always, as well, but, if we look at, literally and justly at what used to be called popular music at, I don't know, in the 20s and the 30s, and
right.
And look at what is popular music now. It kind of it's impossible not to see the difference in quality.
Well, I think
what went into it.
I have a little theory about that. Whatever became popular back in the day, be it be it from Beethoven all the way through, it always seemed to be that we gravitated towards things that were going against the grain. And that's what made it popular. And because it was different, you know? And now it just seems that everything's just trying to play it so safe that there's nothing new in it, nothing original in it, nothing really even creative about it. As a matter of fact, you listen to a lot of songs now, you could place one right on top of the other one and play them simultaneously.
Really cookie cutter type.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest problem.
I hear you. I mean, and then I think ultimately there is probably the issue with the over democratization of the entire the entire process of making music.
Yes.
In some ways, it sounds bad to say because who are you to stop anybody from trying their hand at anything, but
Well,
I
sure.
think what ends up happening is, people try to cut corners and there's probably a lack of respect for what it actually, or a lack of understanding and then a lack of respect for what it takes to actually become someone that can really make music.
Well, it's gone from being art to being product. And I mean, you can make the argument that it always has been that way, but now the divide between it is just so vast that there's no way that you can call a lot of it even art.
Yeah, or music.
It's
Matter. I mean,
yeah.
If I may be so immodest, one of my favorite quotes when I quote myself is that even though I may sound a bit close-minded when I say things like this and kind of crap on or poo-poo some stuff that I really don't think comes up to the standard of being even called music, I say that I may be close-minded, but I prefer having a mind to close.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
kind of where I'm at with these things. And as for what you said about the originality, I think that's where I was headed really with that point about not to begrudge anybody the ability to try to, like I said, try their hand at playing music or anything like that. But with the preponderance of material, it just ends up being more and more difficult to see, a tree for the forest. You know what I mean? And in that sense, when there's so much stuff and so much to think about in terms of the product aspect of it, you end up kind of losing the impetus to create something that would be different against the grain or whatever.
Right.
What's left is a lot of people with very limited means attempting to do what's been done before.
Right. Well, also the fact that people are desperate to stay out there. I mean, when you have people that become instant successes from winning a talent show on television, what are you going to expect if that's what your society has brought us to? I mean, it's that our attention spans have been shortened.
Oh my God!
Technology's done that. When we were kids, you put an album on, you put the needle down, you laid on your bed, and you read the album cover. Now, if you get even slightly bored after about 5 seconds, flick, next song. And it's hard to, it's a tough nut when that's what you're up against.
Most definitely. I mean, there's that. There's also the incredible loss of perspective when things are on shuffle. You know what I mean? In the sense that you could ask a kid that even listens to some music to tell you the periods, of even a band whose music they like by hearing something from this period, but they wouldn't be able to tell you if something was from the 70s or from the mid 80s. Even the output of the same band. 1998.
Oh yeah, or even think of a band with a way shorter lifespan. Take the Beatles, for example. You take their first songs when they first landed in the United States, and then you take the last two albums that they had. That was a completely different band. But when these kids, well, firstly, I have heard, I've seen comments on like iTunes, overrated. That had to be a 13-year-old who heard one song. You know, they didn't really. You didn't see the journey. You didn't see the evolution. You didn't, but for exactly what it is that you were saying, because their involvement in it is so selective. Yeah.
Partly it's not really their fault because this is the way that they're exposed to it. I mean, there's also an argument could certainly be made. When you said music and the music business, music industry, but if we really look at it anthropologically, I mean, music initially and for a very long time was in the service of daily life and the rituals that surrounded it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tribute to nature, to God. It was a more tangible reference to life.
Right.
With time, especially in Europe, I guess it was from the Middle Ages and then especially the Renaissance and beyond, the traveling minstrel, that already started adding an element of, here's a man who's traveling around singing his songs. You're the audience. He's the songsmith. And I think that's where also, another thing about the music initially was that there was no divide between audience and those who create music, because usually they were one and the same.
Sure.
And so eventually it got to this predicament in which it is it's a very separate thing. The audience is the audience. The singer, artist, whatever you want to call the musician, is separate and elevated. You know what I mean? Like
right.
Pretty much taking the position of the entities or the events that would have that position before.
Yes.
Where everybody would be centered around or gravitating towards, the effort gravitating towards either, like I said, paying respect to a god or to nature or a particular aspect of life. Now it's music has become its own thing, which is pretty remarkable. And then there's these people who play it who are being put in a pedestal of some sort. Now, I maintain that, in a lot of ways, that isn't necessarily a good thing. And what I think, especially in improvised music, when it comes to it is more obscure and takes a little bit more to get into, there is a point at which when the performance is really good and the people in the audience are honestly digging it, that at least, and this is my experience, where I start feeling the negation of that intermediary space, and I start realizing that all of a sudden, or in the process, we're coming full circle to this idea of no boundaries between the performer and the audience, like having a communal experience that's beyond, full circle back to the idea of it actually all coming from a different place and all of us sitting there in awe, regardless of whether we happen to be performing or listening.
Right.
But just, having this sense of a shared moment in which we realize that there is, that music is just a metaphor for something mysterious and considerably greater than us.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you know what? I couldn't have said it better myself.
So that's what thoughts like these are what I'm interested in. I mean, this is what music has become for me. It obviously hasn't been that way when you're a kid. You don't know, you don't get these experiences, but you slowly, as you live and you play, you start connecting to other things and making music connect to, or using
Well, that's why we have music.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why it's there.
That's it.
And a lovely thing it is.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, we're about to run out of CD.
Understood.
So I'll just, we'll say that I'd like to invite you at a later date, maybe to actually come to my studio. This podcast I have great aspirations for. I would like to eventually make it not only audio but a video podcast as well.
Oh, cool, man.
You know, and that would be, you know, it could all be like impromptu clinic or what have you, and you know, then really start digging
It'll
into.
be a lot of fun to do all of this and actually play as well.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so let me just say this has been Marko Djordjevic, and this has been D's practice pad.
Yay.
Okay. I'm just going to hit stop and then we'll continue our conversation.
Sounds good. Yeah. Oh, that was fun.
Well.